By 5 o'clock that evening, this amazing Kossar, with no appearance of hurry at all, had got all the stuff for his fight with insurgent bigness out of Urshak and on the road to Hickory Brow. 2 barrels of paraffin and a load of dry brushwood he had bought in Urshak, plentiful sacks of sulfur, 8 big game guns and ammunition, 3 light breech loaders with small shot ammunition for the Wasp, a hatchet, 2 bill hooks, a pick and 3 spades, 2 coils of rope, some bottled beer, soda and whiskey, 1 gross of packets of rat poison, and cold provisions for 3 days had come down from London. All these things he had sent on in a coal trolley and a hay wagon in the most businesslike way, except the guns and ammunition, which were stuck under the seat of the Red Lion wagonette, appointed to bring on Redwood and the 5 picked men who had come up from Ealing at Kossar's summons. Kossar conducted all these transactions with an invincible air of commonplace, in spite of the fact that Urshak was in a panic about the rats, and all the drivers had to be specially paid. All the shops were shut in the place, and scarcely a soul abroad in the street. And when he banged at a door, the window was apt to open. He seemed to consider that the conduct of business for open windows was an entirely legitimate and obvious method. Finally, he and Bensington got to the Red Lion dog cart and set off with the wagonette to overtake the baggage. They did this a little beyond the crossroads, and so reached Hickory Brow first. Bensington, with a gun between his knees, sitting beside Kossar in the dog cart, developed a long, germinated amazement. All they were doing was, no doubt, as Kossar insisted, quite the obvious thing to do. "Get up," said Kossar. It was a hot midday afternoon, not a breath of wind, and the dust was thick in the roads. Few people were about, but the deer beyond the park, pale and browsed in profound tranquility. They saw a couple of big wasps stripping a gooseberry bush just outside Hickory Brow, and another was crawling up and down the front of the little grocer's shop in the village street, trying to find an entry. The grocer was dimly visible within, with an ancient fowling piece in hand, watching its endeavors. The driver of the wagonette pulled up outside the Jolly Drovers and informed Redwood that his part of the bargain was done. In this contention, he was presently joined by the drivers of the wagon and the trolley. Not only did they maintain this, but they refused to let the horses be taken further. "Them big rats is nuts on horses," the trolley driver kept on repeating. Kossar surveyed the controversy for a moment. "Get the things out of the wagonette," he said. And one of his men, a tall, fair, dirty engineer, obeyed. "Give me that shotgun," said Kossar. He placed himself between the drivers. "We don't want you to drive," he said. "You can say what you like," he conceded, "but we want these horses." They began to argue, but he continued speaking. "If you try and assault us, I shall in self-defense let fly at your legs. The horses are going on." He treated the incident as closed. "Get up on that wagon, Flack," he said to a thick-set, wiry little man. "Boom, take the trolley." The 2 drivers blustered to Redwood. "You've done your duty to your employers," said Redwood. "You stop in this village until we come back. No one will blame you, seeing we've got guns. We've no wish to do anything unjust or violent, but this occasion is pressing. I'll pay if anything happens to the horses, never fear." "It's all right," said Kossar, who rarely promised. They left the wagonette behind, and the men who were not driving went afoot. Over each shoulder sloped a gun. They went up the road until at the crest, by the stile, they came into sight of the experimental farm. Found a little group of men there, with a gun or so. Fulchers was among them, and one man, stranger from Maidstone, stood out before the others and watched the place, through an opera glass. These men turned about and stared at Redwood's party. "Anything fresh?" said Kossar. "The Wops keeps a-coming and a-going," said Fulcher. "I reckon you're going down there," ventured Skelmersdale. "Will you come?" said Kossar. Skelmersdale seemed to hesitate and decided that he wouldn't. "Rats about?" said Kossar. "One was up in the pines this morning, ratting, I reckon." Kossar slouched on to overtake his party. Bensington, regarding the experimental farm under his hand, was able to gauge now the vigor of the food. His first impression was that the house was smaller than he had thought, very much smaller. His second was to perceive that all the vegetation between the house and the pine wood had become extremely large. There was a busy coming and going from the wasp nest. They saw a swarm of black shapes interlaced in the air. Once, a yellow-striped monster dropped toward them and hung for a space, watching them with its great compound eyes. But an ineffectual shot from Kossar made it dart off again. They could see nothing of the rats as they came up to the house, and everything seemed perfectly still, except for the rising and falling buzz of the wasp's nest. They led the horses into the yard, and one of Kossar's men, seeing the door open, the whole of the middle portion of the door had been gnawed out, walked into the house. Nobody missed him for a time, the rest being occupied with the barrels of paraffin. And the first intimation they had of his separation from them was the report of his gun and the whiz of his bullet. Bang, bang! Both barrels. And his first bullet, it seems, went through the cask of sulfur, smashed out a stave from the further side and filled the air with yellow dust. Redwood had kept his gun in hand and let fly at something gray that leapt past him. He had a vision of the broad hind quarters, the long scaly tail and long soles of the hind feet of a rat, and fired his second barrel. He saw Bensington drop as the beast vanished round the corner. Then for a time, everybody was busy with a gun. For 3 minutes, lives were cheap at the experimental farm. And the banging of guns filled the air. Careless of Bensington in his excitement, rushed in pursuit, and was knocked headlong by a mass of brick fragments, mortar, plaster, and rotten splinters that came flying out at him as a bullet whacked through the wall. He found himself sitting on the ground with blood on his hands and lips, and a great stillness brooded over all about him. Then a flattish voice from within the house remarked, "Did you get him?" "Hello," said Redwood. "Hello there," answered the voice. And then, "Did you chaps get him?" A sense of the duties of friendship returned to Redwood. "Is Mr. Bensington hurt?" he said. The man inside heard imperfectly. "No one ain't to blame if I ain't," said the voice inside. It became clearer to Redwood that he must have shot Bensington. He forgot the cuts upon his face, arose and came back to find Bensington seated upon the ground and rubbing his shoulder. Bensington looked over his glasses. "We peppered him, Redwood," he said, "and then he tried to jump over me and knocked me down, but I let him have it with both barrels. And my, how it has hurt my shoulder, to be sure." A man appeared in the doorway. "I got him once in the chest and once in the side," he said. "Where's the wagons?" said Kossar, appearing amidst a thicket of gigantic canary creeper leaves. It became evident to Redwood's amazement, first, that no one had been shot, and secondly, that the trolley and the wagon had shifted 50 yards and were now standing with interlocked wheels amidst the tangled distortions of Skinner's kitchen garden. The horses had stopped their plunging. halfway towards them. The burst barrel of sulfur lay in the path with a cloud of sulfur dust above it. He indicated this to Kassar and walked toward him. I got him in between the ribs once, and once in the face as he turned on me. They were joined by two men as they whirred at the locked wheel. "I killed that rat," said one of the men. "Have they got him?" asked Kassar. "Jim Bates has found him, beyond the hedge. I got him just as he came round the corner, whack behind the shoulder." When things were a little shipshape again, Redwood went and stared at the huge misshapen corpse. The brute lay on its side with its body slightly bent. Its rodent teeth overhanging its receding lower jaw gave its face a look of colossal feebleness, of weak avidity. It seemed not in the least ferocious or terrible. Its forepaws reminded him of lank, emaciating hands. Except for the one neat round hole with a scorched rim on either side of its neck, the creature was absolutely intact. He meditated over this fact for some time. "There must have been two rats," he said without turning away. "Yes, and the one that everybody hit got away." This incident left the party alert, but not unstrung. They got their stores into the house, which had evidently been ransacked by the rats after the flight of Mrs. Skinner. And four of the men took the two horses back to Hickley Brow. They dragged the dead rat through the hedge and into a position commanded by the windows of the house. Then two of the men hacked through several of the main stems of the Canary Creek. Huge cylinders they were, a couple of feet in diameter, that came out by the sink at the back. And while Kassar set the house in order for the night, Bensington, Redwood, and one of the assistant electricians went cautiously around by the foul runs in search of the rat holes. They skirted the giant nettles widely, for these huge weeds threatened them with poisoned thorns a good inch long. Then round beyond the gnawed, dismantled stile, they came abruptly on the huge cavernous throat of the most westerly of the giant rat holes, an evil-smelling profundity that drew them up into a line together. "I hope they'll come out," said Redwood with a glance at the penthouse of the well. "If they don't," reflected Bensington. "They will," said Redwood. They meditated. "We shall have to rig up some sort of flare if we do go in," said Redwood. They went up a little path of white sand through the pine wood and halted presently within sight of the wasp holes. The sun was setting down, and the wasps were coming home for good, their wings of golden light and twirling halos about them. The three men peered out from under the tree. They did not care to go right to the edge of the wood and watch these tremendous insects drop, crawl for a little, and enter and disappear. "They will be still in a couple of hours from now," said Redwood. "We can't miss those holes," said Bensington, "even if the night is dark. By the by, about the light. Full moon," said the electrician. "I looked it up." They went back and consulted with Kassar. He said that obviously they must get the sulfur, niter, and plaster of Paris through the wood before twilight, and for that they broke bulk and carried the sacks. After the necessary shouting of the preliminary directions, never a word was spoken. And as the buzzing of the wasp nest died away, there was scarcely a sound in the world but the noise of footsteps, the heavy breathing of burdened men, and the thud of the sacks. They all took turns at that labor, except Mr. Bensington, who was manifestly unfit. He took post in the Skinner's bedroom with a rifle to watch the carcass of the dead rat and of the others. They took turns to rest from sack carrying and to keep watch, two at a time, upon the rat holes behind the nettle grove. Mr. Bensington sat at his window, on a hard horsehair stuffed armchair that had given a touch of social distinction to the Skinner's sitting room for many years. His unaccustomed rifle rested on the sill, and he watched the dark bulk of the dead rat in the thickening twilight, and wandered about him in curious meditation. He turned his head, a blend of faint domestic scents, beer, cheese, rotten apples, and old boots as the leading motifs. It was full of reminiscence of the vanished Skinners. He regarded the dim room for a space. The furniture had been greatly disordered, perhaps by some inquisitive rat, but a coat upon a clothes peg on the door, a razor, and some dirty scraps of paper, and a piece of soap that had hardened through years of disuse into a horny cube were reminders of Skinner's distinctive personality. It came to Bensington's mind with a complete novelty of realization that in all probability the man had been killed and eaten, at least in part by the monster that now lay dead there in the darkness. To think of all that a harmless-looking discovery in chemistry may lead to. Here he was in homely England, and yet in infinite danger, sitting out alone with a gun in a twilit ruined house, remote from every comfort, his shoulder dreadfully bruised by a gun kick. And by Jove, he grasped now how profoundly the order of the universe had changed for him. He felt he had taken a step and come into a world of new immensities. What other monsters might not those deepening shadows hide? The tips of the giant nettles came out sharp and black against the pale green and amber of the western sky. Everything was very still indeed. He wondered why he could not hear the others away there around the corner of the house. The shadow in the cart shed was now an abysmal black. Bang, 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 a sequence of echoes in the shout. A long silence. Bang, and a stir of echoes. Then still. Then, thank goodness, Redwood and Cossar were coming out of the inaudible darkness, and Redwood was calling, Bensington, Bensington, we've bagged another of the rats. Cossar's bagged another of the rats. The watch on the rat holes had been maintained, but the watchers had shifted to the hill slope above the holes, feeling this is a safer firing place. The others rested in the house, and the three leaders discussed the night's work with the men. The moon rose toward midnight, and as soon as it was clear of the downs, everyone except the rat hole sentinels started off in single file, led by Cossar, toward the wasp's nest. So far as the wasp's nest went, they found their task exceptionally easy. Danger there was, no doubt, danger to life. But it never so much as thrust its head out of that portentous hillside. They stuffed in the sulfur and nitrogen. They bunged the holes soundly and fired their trains. Then, with a common impulse, all the party but Cossar turned and ran toward the long shadow in the pond, and, finding Cossar stayed behind, came to a halt together in the mountain, 100 yards away, convenient to a ditch that offered cover. Just for a minute or two, the moonlit night, all black and white, was heavy with a suffocated buzz that rose and mingled to a roar, a deep, abundant note, and culminated. And then, almost incredibly, the night was still. By Jove, said Bensington, almost in a whisper, it's done.